What's going on, Space Monkeys? Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden. We're going to continue with Dreamland by Sam Quinones today. This is page 236. The chapter is called Pentecostal Piety, Fierce Scratches, Portland, Oregon. In 1906, a delirious Christian revival roared out of LA. It was an African-American movement, but soon was integrated. It took the name of the street where the home church resided. The Azusa Street Revival marked the first explosion of the Pentecostal faith. With it came fervent praying, speaking in tongues, and the belief in a personal rebirth in the Lord. The revival spread east across America to the Midwest and South. Within a decade, the movement arrived in New York City. Among those who embraced it, there were numerous Russian immigrant workers. They returned to Russia to preach their new gospel as communist revolutionaries were toppling the Tsarist government. These Pentecostal pioneers converted thousands in Russia, the Ukraine, and Belarus. The new Soviet state sent many to gulags. Other believers soldiered on. They held all-day Sunday services in houses where they spoke in tongues, preached baptism by hardship, and became clannish in self-defense. The women wore headscarves. Dancing, jewelry, and makeup were prohibited. They were pacifists and forswore guns and television. They married young and had lots of children. Higher education was blocked to them, so they became welders and truck drivers. Their faith was Protestant, but Russian Pentecostals leaned on the severe God of the Old Testament to shepherd them through the Soviet oppression. By the time the Soviet experiment ended, 700,000 people, most of them in the Ukraine and Belarus, were fervent Pentecostals. Then a dream come true. The United States, a land where Protestant faiths were encouraged and even had radio and television stations, opened to them. Tens of thousands emigrated, settling mostly in Sacramento, Seattle, and Portland, Oregon. Among them was a young couple, Anatoly and Nina Sineyev, from the city of Baskan. Anatoly was a welder. Nina's father was an evangelist, touring Germany and Israel to preach the gospel. When the Soviet walls tumbled, the Sineyevs took to their 2-year-old toddler daughters and fled to Portland. Nina's first baby in America was also their first son, Tovai. From then on, she was always pregnant. The couple had 10 more children. Anatoly was always working. No kidding. They moved 8 times, mostly in the Portland suburbs of Gresham, in Milwaukee, where Russian Pentecostals, not the Milwaukee, like the city that you know of, spelled with I-E at the end, Milwaukee, where Russian Pentecostals concentrated. They attended a conservative Russian Pentecostal church and raised their children in their faith. But their American dreamland contained hazards they hadn't imagined. Remaining Christian in America, where everything was permitted, was harder than maintaining the faith in the Soviet Union, where nothing was allowed. Churches were everywhere, but so were distractions and sin, television, sexualized and permissive pop culture, and wealth. Leaders turned to the prohibitions that had sustained the faith during the dark decades back home. Girls couldn't dye their hair, pierce their ears, or wear makeup. Young men and women could not talk or date. If a man wanted to marry, he went to his pastor, who asked the young woman if the suitor interested her. Russian Pentecostals didn't associate much with American society, which they viewed as a threat. Families with televisions were deemed less holy, and they hid the machines from visitors. Pastors called TV the devil with one eye. The Sineyev's daughters were not allowed to wear nail polish or mingle with Americans. But Anatoly kept a television in the basement and turned it on when he thought his children weren't listening. They watched it when he wasn't home. The Sineyev's second child, Elena, was their most stubborn, a pretty girl with an aquiline nose. Elena raised her siblings while her mother was pregnant and railed at the church teachings that ruled her home. All they preached was that women should wear long skirts, head coverings, no makeup, she said. They never teach you about love. They didn't want us to know God forgives. As they moved into adolescence, the Sineyev's oldest children hid their lives from their parents. Alina applied makeup on the school bus each morning and exchanged her long skirts for pants. After school, she donned Pentecostal clothes, removing her makeup, and arrived home looking as plain as when she had left. Meanwhile, the U.S. economy frothed. Russian Pentecostals opened auto shops and trucking and welding businesses. After years of Soviet penury, they were suddenly doing quite well and grew rich. Pentecostal kids were steeped in communist America at school and old world Russia at home. Consumerist, not communist. Yeah, there was never a communist America. They were steeped in consumerist America at school and old world Russia at home. They endured church but valued wealth. They eschewed college, worked to buy what they wanted, and quietly rebelled against their parents' old ways. Then OxyContin appeared. In Portland and other West Coast cities, this seemed to happen in about 2004. Dr. Gary Oxman watched it arrive from his offices at Multnomah County Health Department in downtown Portland and saw overdose deaths again begin to rise. Portland never had many David Proctor-style pill mills. Instead, thousands of legitimate doctors began prescribing opiates like OxyContin for chronic pain. What we had here is a medical community that's gone along with the idea that pain is the fifth vital sign, Oxman said when we met one day years later at a cafe in Northeast Portland. It's not this wild abuse, it's that we have a whole medical community prescribing moderately too much. Gary Oxman had seen this story a decade before, of course. Unstinting supplies of Jalisco black tar heroin lashed Portland addiction and death rates ever higher through the 90s. Oxman, the group of recovering addicts known as RAP, and others toiled to bring down those numbers, and the numbers did drop. By 2004, OxyContin was undermining that work. People are getting recruited into opiate addiction through pills, he said. Then because of the cost of pills, they transferred heroin. Oxman plotted the data on a graph, as he had for his heroin overdose study in December '99. The same steady rise in opiate overdose deaths began in '04. The legless addict Alan Levine had been clean for almost a decade by then. He had emerged as a rambunctious voice for recovering addicts and was named to a local drug planning committee and the Governor's Council on Drug Abuse. But in 2006, pills were everywhere. Levine was treated with Vicodin and then OxyContin for pain related to leg sores brought on by his Hep C. He began abusing again and soon fell back into the street, where I found him in a downtown motel a few years later. He had switched back to black tar, buying from those who bought from those Mexicans who were still delivering all over town. I tried to get another number for them, he told me, but no one wanted to give it up. Mostly, though, opiates consumed young people in Portland who had never used them. Virtually all of them were white. As a group, it appears none fell into it harder than the children of Russian Pentecostals who came fleeing persecution and found U.S. pop culture a greater challenge than anything a Soviet apparatchik could invent. Among them was Vitaly Mulyar. Born in the Ukraine, Vitaly grew up in a cocoon of the Russian Pentecostal Church in America, first in Sacramento and then Portland. Like his peers, he spoke fluent Russian, and his English carried the hint of accent from the country he had left when he was 2. He, like his peers, found church desiccated and boring. Vitaly and his Pentecostal friends grew up in their own world. He found work as a mechanic. Cars became his passion, especially his prized Sequoia Green 99 VW Jetta. Then a friend at work offered him a Vicodin. Doctors prescribed them, so how bad could they be? With that, he found a new passion. Soon, he migrated to OxyContin, and his habit rose to 4 oxys a day. To afford it, Vitaly became one of Portland's first Russian Pentecostal dealers of oxy. Many Pentecostal kids had money from jobs they worked. Vitaly sold into his cloistered network of friends. Many more began selling to support their habit, and he supplied them. Pill addiction snuck in among kids whose parents took them to church 3 times a week and ordered them not to watch TV. Vitaly would look out on the congregation each Sunday as he stood to sing Russian hymns and know that half of his peers were high on oxy. Some nodded off, their faces in their hands. By 2006, Vitaly believed he was the largest oxy dealer in Russian Pentecostal Portland. He could easily afford the pills he needed each day. He also put thousands of dollars into his VW. In 2008, however, he was arrested and lost his job. On probation, he could no longer sell pills and thus couldn't afford them either. He switched to cheaper black tar heroin that he bought from the Mexicans who circulated it through town. He was in and out of jail, milking his parents for drug money. Russian Pentecostal dealers he owed drove a truck onto his parents' lawn, demanding their money. He lost his Jetta. Soon he was on the street, sleeping on cardboard in downtown Portland. Hundreds of Russian Pentecostal kids were following this pattern. Their parents were oblivious or ashamed and kept their children's addiction as hidden as their televisions. Elena Senyayev tried heroin the first time with a friend from work who told her it would relax her. Her sister started with OxyContin. So did Tovoy, her brother. Elena lost her job and then, desperate for her dope, began dating a Russian Pentecostal heroin dealer who also got his tar from the Mexicans delivering it like pizza. Elena believed she was the only one in her family using heroin. But one night at home, she looked at her sister and brother and watched them nod off and knew the truth. 2 decades after Anatoly and Nina left the Soviet Union for the freedoms of America, each of their 3 oldest children was quietly addicted to black tar heroin from Jalisco, Nayarit. Police arrested Elena's sister for petty theft and Tovoy for shoplifting. Anatoly and Nina frantically began checking their children's arms. Elena, meanwhile, shot up in other parts of her body. One afternoon in March 2011, Tovy told his mother that he had the flu. He went out with Elena and they returned hours later. He seemed different, but Nina had too many kids to pay close attention. The next morning, she found her eldest boy in bed, unconscious and gasping for breath. Paramedics couldn't revive him. He lasted for 3 days on life support. The Portland suburb of Milwaukee in Clackamas County is so small and quiet that its police department has only 2 detectives. That morning, one of the 2, Tom Garrett, was on call. He found balloons of heroin and a syringe in Tovy's room. Over the next 18 months, the death of Tovy Senyayev became a test case for Clackamas County. Meanwhile, at home, Nina checked the arms of her daughter, Elena, which were always under the long-sleeve blouses of Pentecostal Piety. There she found bruises and fierce little scratches. We'll continue on page 241 next. We was carrying the epidemic. Hope you're enjoying the book, guys. Keep fighting that good fight out there.